Welcome to Ex Parte with Aundrae Allison. I'm your host, Aundrae Allison. This show places you inside the first person reality of ex parte family court proceedings, where one parent can make a one sided emergency request to a judge for custody, protection, and relocation before the accused parent even knows the hearing is taking place. The ex parte order is the go to choice for parents who know how to play the system. They are fully aware of its built-in incentives. These incentives, they tend to bypass the requirement of a standard custody hearing. And by launching a one-sided legal strike, the petitioner secures this ultra-high percentage of gaining primary child custody by default. Then you tack on the reality of zero consequences for making the false statements, and zero penalties for flat out lying under oath. And you can see why the ex parte order is prime for exploitation. This series is based on real world events. I went from being a normal dad of two handsome toddler boys and to being a nationwide criminal fugitive simply for just returning my children home back from a state where they got relocated to. And that first ex parte order that was awarded against me, it severed our parent-child relationship for 19 days, which was the first time I've ever been away from my children. And that also, again, allowed my children to be relocated to another state. Then the second ex parte order increased that 19 days to 68 days of separation. I then reconnected with my children for 7 days after returning them home to North Carolina. And then, the same accuser, the petitioner, was awarded 3 more ex partes within 7 days. And those were signed by 3 different judges in 2 separate states. And this led to my arrest for kidnapping of a minor charge in North Carolina and a felony deprivation of parental rights charge in Minnesota. Now that led to a governor's warrant issued by the state of Minnesota, signed by Governor Tim Walz. This then led to me being jailed for 44 days and held without bond. And out of 240 plus days, my children experienced only 7 total interactions to one of their parents that they were used to seeing every day of their life. All of this happened without any proof or evidence to prove that I was actually an abuser or a threat to my family. The 5 ex parte orders that was awarded against me relied on, 5 one-on-one conversations between the petitioner and the courts. And all the petitioner had to do was just create a urgent matter by claiming they needed protection for them and the children. And they were awarded those ex partes. Now, through the eyes of the parent on the receiving end, that be me, this series challenges the core assumption of family law. It dismantles the belief that every court decision automatically serves the best interest of the child. Instead, we are revealing the disturbing contradiction of how a single one-sided request instantly reshapes a child's life. Once signed by a judge, it goes into effect immediately, and it enforces mandatory severance to the parent-child relationship. The court then completely avoids the urgency needed to restore the connection between the child and the absent parent. The ex parte order applies very questionable exceptions to normal court procedures, which leads to fundamental parental rights being stripped before the accused parent has the opportunity to speak. In doing so, the court unknowingly becomes an accomplice, a state-sanctioned partner in the manipulating parents' game, their wicked game of revenge, of course. And this series just demands you look at the system and ask yourself, when did the best interest of the child become a legal loophole? A loophole that allows a parent to weaponize a lie, disappear across state lines, and legally erase a parent overnight. So first and foremost, we must anchor ourselves in a foundational truth. And that foundational truth is the parent-child relationship is one of the most important developmental bonds in human life. And it is not an accessory. It is a biological necessity. In fact, this bond single-handedly shapes a child's emotional regulation, identity, and security. It totally dictates their confidence, their resilience, and their future social development. And we're lucky to have constitutional laws to protect this. So under the American constitutional law, parents have a fundamental right under the 14th Amendment's due process clause to direct the care, custody, education, and upbringing of their children. The state has a right to act to protect children from real imminent harm, for sure. It's needed, but undoubtedly the state should never interfere with the parent-child relationship without due process or without ironclad evidence and without meaningful judicial restraint. In addition to these legal protections, a terrifying blind spot exists in our society. Most parents are completely unaware of how fragile their constitutional rights actually are. I'm a living example of that. They have no idea that their parent-child bond can be suddenly, violently severed by a state-sanctioned legal decision made completely without them present. They do not know that they can be legally erased long before a single accusation of real abuse is ever proven with verified evidence. Conversely, in the emergency ex parte custody proceedings, the court's protective instinct is completely inverted. It works against itself. One side can walk into a courthouse off the street, reach a judge first, and unleash the full force of the law before the truth ever enters the room. Now, for clarity, I just want to provide a simple ex parte order definition. Ex parte is a Latin legal term meaning from one party. An ex parte order is a legal directive issued by a judge at the sole request of one party without giving any prior notice to or receiving any input from the opposing party. And here's a quick critique of the ex parte. This, again, a one-sided emergency request is granted without notifying the accused parent while meant for imminent dangers like abduction or abuse. Critics argue they are easily weaponized and they lead to due process violations and unfair shifts in initial custody and severed parent-child relationships. Again, long before a defense can ever be presented. Subsequently, every ex parte case follows a very similar structure. You have one parent who files this emergency request claiming immediate danger, abuse, instability, or risk to the children. And because the allegations are presented as urgent, a judge reviews the filings quickly, often within hours, without notifying the other parent or allowing them to respond once again. So again, consider the simple, dangerous mechanics of how this plays out in real life. You have a parent just walks in and, the other parent is completely in the dark. The judge reviews that one side story. The accused parent oblivious, they're blindsided, they can't respond. The judge signs an emergency order that very same day. The order becomes enforceable immediately. So custody then shifts and the contact is restricted between child and parent, and the law is fully dispatched. A later hearing does get set, and it's usually 7 to 14 days, but by that time, the separation has begun, and it can sometimes lead to, custody by default. And that's why a lot of people who are aware of it, who has agendas, they utilize it to get custody. Within this episode, it's really important for us to address the profound damage done to the child once the ex parte is awarded. And that in turn breaks the child companionship with the parent and separates the entire family in a day. Indeed, this is a catastrophic failure of the family court system. A forced state-sanctioned separation between a parent and a child is beyond a failure. It is an execution of rights first and a trial second. And there is a lot of information that is scientifically proven. The psychological consequences of the ex parte order shows and supports the damage from that abrupt parental separation. It's decades of research examining forced parental separation, and it have consistently shown a devastating truth. And that truth is an abrupt disruption of a parent-child relationship produces severe emotional and developmental effects. And studies in child development and attachment theory repeatedly associate prolonged parental absence with a terrifying list of consequences. And that list includes increased anxiety, depression, emotional dysregulation, confusion, identity instability, and long-term behavioral difficult. The research in particular that really caught my eye and it stands out is research that was discussed in The Epidemic of Fatherlessness by James Elbert Ellis Jr. at Liberty University. He identified prolonged separation from a parent particularly a father, is strongly associated with increased rates of mental health disorders, substance abuse, and academic failure. And in his research, it tracks a straight line to incarceration and emotional instability and higher suicide risk later in their life. And that is why the ex parte has this high threshold. Importantly, because of the ex parte custody order and when it's issued, by it being in complete secrecy, the law is statutorily designed to enforce an exceptionally high threshold before granting. And that threshold must require real verified proof. The court must find an immediate, genuine physical emergency. The court must also find that waiting for a standard hearing would likely cause irreversible, irreparable harm to the child. Now, if that objective proof is missing, the law dictates the order should not be granted. Now, here's the huge problem is when the court lowers that high threshold standard, the court's instinct to err on the side of caution leads to an opening for a parent to easily weaponize the ex parte order. That's what's being seen across courts across the country. The ex parte is a perfectly prime instrument for manipulating parents with a hidden agenda. Now, I have to take a second to talk about something that is laughably absurd. If you've never seen a covert narcissist in a legal setting, it's truly a sight to behold. And, it's kind of funny to see how someone can have such a complete and total disregard for law. These people will openly lie under oath and commit blatant perjury and just fabricate insane claims just to execute their smear campaign. They have absolutely zero respect for the seriousness of the court, which is appalling. And to them, the American justice system is a complete joke. But here's the real punchline. Like, the court actually falls for it at times. And it's therapeutic. You have to laugh so you don't cry, because just seeing how the covert narcissist treats the hallowed halls of justice like a playground, like a performance arena, and the court just hands them a standing ovation is definitely a sight to see. And, that leads to the reason why this ex parte order is loaded with incentives for people like this to utilize them to execute their ulterior motives or to execute their agenda. When I step back and I look at the structure of the ex parte, as I communicated to you, it becomes easier to understand why many professionals describe the ex parte as the weapon of choice in a high conflict custody dispute. It's also used in divorce court too. It is the ultimate tool for individuals with narcissistic or coercive personality traits. The incentive structure is already built into the order itself. So a person aware of how the system operates quickly realizes that judges are trained to prioritize the prevention of potential harm above almost everything else during the emergency stage. No courts would rather intervene quickly and sort the facts out later than risking failing to act in a situation that could potentially involve danger. So all that means is this perceived risk immediately becomes powerful to people like that. And once someone like that understands that dynamic, the process itself can begin looking less like an emergency safeguard and more like a strategic opportunity. Again, because at the initial ex parte stage, when it's first filed, the parent is not required to fully prove the allegations before major consequences can occur. And, to see exactly why this system is primed for exploitation from a covert narcissist, we just simply can apply the core traits of people with this kind of personality disorder. These psychological markers don't just align with the ex parte loophole, they supercharge the whole ex parte loophole. And the first trait is grandiosity and entitlement. They believe that standard rules and court procedures and co-parenting boundaries simply do not apply to them. This gives them the eternal justification to completely bypass the other parent without a second thought. The second trait is a profound lack of empathy. They are entirely blind to the emotional and psychological trauma that an abrupt removal inflicts on their own children. To them, the child is not a human being at all. The child is not someone to protect. The child is a pawn to move in their game. And the third trait is a pathological need for total control and domination. So, they do not view custody as a shared parental responsibility. They view it as a high stakes game that can be won and should be won at all costs. The ex parte order is their fast track, definitely to instantly disarming you and dictating all terms of their game that they play from a position of imaginary power. The fourth trait is manipulative and exploitative behavior. Covert narcissists excel at altering timelines and taking context out of order and exaggerating minor disagreements into full-blown emergencies. And they use the authority of the court system as a proxy because they do have avoidant type of traits as well. But they use it to punish, retaliate, and inflict harm on a partner. And the fifth trait is pathological lying and smear campaign. They are highly skilled at presenting a polished, victim-centered narrative to a judge or to the public, while simultaneously using unverified paperwork to systemically destroy the other parent's reputation behind closed doors. So when a system rewards the lie before checking the facts, it doesn't just attract a covert narcissist. It literally hands them the keys to the kingdom. And again, that's why, it's known as the weapon of choice for the covert narcissist, because the incentive is in the structure. Now, place that structure into the hands of someone that is driven by control and driven by punishment and domination of others and outcomes and image preservation. It gives them an emotional leverage. And just simply from a pattern recognition perspective, the attraction becomes obvious. A single ex parte filing can instantly shift the custody dynamics, giving them leverage and an advantage. And it can restrict communication, take the parent out the home. And again, individuals motivated by control and manipulation will inevitably recognize its power and attempt to exploit it. The cost-benefit analysis to the ex parte order is a high reward and very low risk because, when you're thinking about a smear campaign and, nowadays, if you think about it, what is being revealed to the general public? A strong narrative about the unmasking of the narcissist. Now, you take the core damage from all of the information just shared, finding the studies, in particularly a study done by the Center for Prosecutor Integrity, they exposed that 67% of false accusation cases, the fabricator is female, and with 27% of those cases dropped solely because of a custody dispute. Nevertheless, when the court lowers that high threshold standard we talked about, the accusation instantly becomes action. One parent's untested type claim becomes weaponized state power, and the child is ripped away from a loving parent before a single word is verified. So without a doubt, that is the core damage of the ex parte loophole. Here's the research on the importance of the parent-child relationship that is ultimately what this is all about. The research says the parent-child relationship is developmental, psychological, biological, and foundational. Decades of research, all at our fingertips now. Thank God we're in the information age. It proves that stable, unbroken parental relationships help children build emotional regulation, security, and long-term well-being. Another research study that I really, love to analyze and look through it and provides a lot of insight is the Bowen's family systems theory. It was developed by psychiatrist Dr. Murray Bowen. It explains that the family functions as a interconnected emotional system. Everyone is all together. We're all linked. And each member's emotional stability directly affects the function of everyone else within this unit. His theory emphasizes deep emotional interdependence, and parents and children, we continuously influence one another's thoughts, behaviors, stress responses, and sense of security. Now, Dr. Bowen also described families as living under the same emotional skin. So tension, anxiety, conflict, or disruption experienced by one member of the family, it spreads throughout the whole system, and it predictably alters the emotional functioning of others in the system. Now, within that framework, abruptly removing a parent from a child's daily life does not simply affect that isolated relationship. It completely destabilizes the emotional balance of the entire family. Bowen's research also explains that when anxiety and instability increase, emotional stress spreads through the interconnected relationships, and this leads children to experience confusion and insecurity. They face withdrawal, anxiety, depression, or behavior problems as they desperately attempt to adapt to the disruption that they experience. The theory emphasizes that children rely heavily on consistency, stability, and predictable attachment relationships to their parents to survive, which is why prolonged separation from a parent after the ex parte is granted, it creates this long-term developmental and emotional scars that extends far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Now, if you look at all the mountain of science that was just established, it pains you to think that this research is not a secret. It is readily available, exhaustively tracked, and peer reviewed, and it needs to be implemented to the family courts. Here are the dangers of the parent-child separation. And when you disrupt that stability, you trigger a cascade of psychological trauma. And studies have repeatedly associated prolonged parental absence with this devastating list of consequences. And those consequences include increased anxiety, clinical depression, identity instability, and long-term behavioral difficulties. So Atala does not experience separation as a temporary legal procedure. Clearly, the child experiences this as a sudden catastrophic loss. And, the dangers from a psychological and psychiatric standpoint, in addition, explicitly proves that childhood emotional abuse causes the exact same neurological trauma as direct physical assault. Particularly forced parental separation is dangerous because it is actively imposed by the state and it is backed by a judge's majestic signature, and then it's enforced by armed police officers. So without explanation and before evidence is tested, you're seeing a family being totally ripped apart. And, it makes you turn into like this information geek about everything, especially once you put it upon yourself to, speak on behalf of the innocent children who are the most affected by this, because adults are adults. And we've had our fair share of developing into the people that we are, and we're equipped. We have everything that has fully developed within the body to help us adapt and to make sense of certain things. But innocent children are still in their prime development stages, and it just takes a different toll on them, and they don't have a voice in the matter. And in fact, it feels as if after the ex parte is awarded, the court tends to forget about the children in a sense and start to feel they're just protecting the petitioner who filed it. Now, here's more data and more research. I looked into the America First Policy Institute. They did an online study, and they collected reports that children from fatherless homes account for disproportionately high percentages of substance abuse, juvenile incarceration, and school dropouts. Now, conversely, longitudinal child development research, it links stable father involvement with improved emotional regulation and long-term psychological resilience. The solution is attacking this with the Ex Parte Reform Act. Now, despite the darkness of this loop, the solution is not to totally eliminate the ex parte emergency request, because, again, real emergencies exist, and children must be protected at all costs. Alternatively, the solution is just to require emergency custody power to meet a real verified high threshold before the state is ever allowed to separate a child from a home. I propose the court must require a 48-hour evidentiary verification rule. The court must also legally weigh the severe psychological harm of sudden separation. So incorporate the research on that. And lastly, I propose the court must preserve a minimum parent-child contact floor. Again, unless verified evidence, the high threshold amount is, provided, the child needs to be reconnected to the parent that is absent. So, and then another thing I incorporated as a proposal is the court must enforce a strict 7-day parental severance hard cap. It's a 14-day window to get a hearing. And, when you're holding that for a hearing, the petitioner who filed it, the accuser, they have to appear. It should be mandated. You should not be able to just be absent and ask for a continuance and then be absent again in hopes of, getting custody by default. In this episode, I just wanted to outline the importance of the parent-child relationship. Again, it's one of the most important developmental bonds in human life, and it's a biological necessity. It dictates their confidence, their resilience, and their future social development. The ex parte causes so much harm to this critical dynamic by blindly recognizing the importance of maintaining the parent-child relationship. you have this abrupt shift in custody and protection the state imposes themselves, but they are so reluctant and slow to reestablish the status quo. It's amazing to see. And, once you find the court lowering that high threshold standard in place to award the ex parte, the door opens up for this to be a massive, incentive for a covert narcissist type of parent and to help them execute their agenda. So sharing this information is how we raise awareness and how we educate the public and provide a voice for those impacted by the ex parte loop. As we continue to provide insight into the destructive ex parte order and how it's weaponized in family court cases, take a second right now to protect this experience and this platform. At the follow, like, subscribe, and share this content, because someone is fighting this exact invisible war right now, and they need to hear this. So again, hit that like and subscribe button. This is Ex Parte with Aundrae Allison. See you next episode.